Hey everyone, it's DigiDraws here, and welcome to my first ever voiceover video. In this video, I will be showing you some tips and tricks on how to properly do line work before coloring digital art. On one side, I will show you the mistakes that I used to make and the mistakes that I see a lot on DeviantArt and Tumblr that a lot of people do. And on this side, I will show you how to make it look more visually pleasing so that your line work is much cleaner and it looks better before you color it. With that, I will also be showing you how you can add many different techniques to your line work so that it looks even better. So let's just jump right into this. One of the first mistakes that I see when it comes to line work is that a lot of people forget about line weight pen brushes. So basically what line weight is that the brush setting that you have can either taper or it can vary in size depending on the brush setting and the specific brush that you have. So I'm using the default brushes on Fire Alpaca because I'm pretty much comfortable with them. I didn't really have to change anything. So as you can see right here, this one is a consistent brush. I made a specific brush called a bad pen, and basically what it is, it's a consistent brush. It's one straight line all the way through, so that no matter how much pressure you put onto it, it'll remain the same exact line weight. And this can really affect how messy or how clean your line work is. And usually when applied to your artwork, it makes it look very distressed and rigid. And a lot of people don't realize that when they do line work on their paper. This adds a lot of thickness as well, depending on your preferential brush setting. But a lot of the times, when brushes are like this, the line work tends to be very messy and it looks very inconsistent when it comes to the clean, smooth lines, as opposed to what a line weighted brush would look like. Depending on your settings, it can actually look very clean, like I'm showing here. As it tapers at the end, it creates this sort of visual part of your line work, especially on hair. It makes it look voluminous. It adds dimension to your hair because hair is very flamboyant, it's poofy, it's very stylistic, and you want to show that when you're doing line work, especially with things like hair or clothing, because texture is very important, and I'll get to that in a little bit. So it's especially important to have a line weighted pen brush for this specific reason, and it's to make it look visually pleasing and much cleaner when you do your line work. And a lot of the times when I see it, it looks very choppy and messy, and a lot of the times people forget that their line work is a very important part of their artwork because it can pop. It makes your art pop a lot of the times, especially before coloring. When you do black and white line art, it really stands out from the color portion of your artwork because black is such a dark, in-depth color that it makes everything else kind of seem like a supported added feature. So another technique you need to know when doing line work is to follow through with your brush strokes. As you can see, I have been following through with one specific line stroke and not adding this little sketchy textured line work that a lot of people I see do. Unless you're extremely confident in knowing that you can land that brush in the exact same spot where you started the line work, I wouldn't recommend doing it. It just makes your artwork look very amateur, and it makes it look very etch-a-sketch textured. You ever remember those etch-a-sketch where they had little magnet pieces, and when you tried to draw, it just looked like a terrible mess. Doing this also creates very clean lines, and a lot of people are always asking, you know, how do I create clean lines without making my brush setting any smaller? And a lot of the times I tell them, well, I can tell from your work that you're adding a sketched texture such as this, and this is actually a pretty decent job, but as you can see, as you turn your wrist, it gets quite hard to do rounded edges without doing that, and a lot of the times you often miss the last part where you started. So that's a very important tool to remember when doing line art. Another thing you really need to remember when doing line art is that a lot of the things you are drawing have different texture. Hair, I tend to add these little very tiny dashes in the hair because I just think it makes it look better. I don't know how to describe it, but I find it just visually pleasing to put these little dash marks where the hair and the lighting goes. It just adds a lot of visual character when you apply certain textures to hair or to clothing, adding wrinkles in clothing, adding shading, shadowing. I was about to say shadowing, but shading and adding these, what I tend to do is actually these little dash marks, where it often looks like that. And I tend to find it better than this little, the cross hatching, because it adds a little more coordination, and it makes it seem like you intentionally did it, which you did. But even though it takes longer, it's often worth it in the end. And with art, you have to remember to be patient. I know a lot of people that don't have patience who really want to do art, but I tell them that can be often difficult if you don't have the right patience and you don't practice, correctly. So when doing line work, it's extremely important to follow through with your line work, especially with skin, because that is the smoothest part of a person. It's the one surface that has the most texture, but when you see it from a profile such as this, it's very smooth, and you want to make sure you capture that when doing line work. Line work captures a lot of what you're trying to convey in your character, such as hair and clothing. Creating certain textures can often create different emotions too, such as wrinkled clothing. It can often reflect as the character being distressed or exhausted, kind of like when you wear pajamas that are often really wrinkled. This is a really important thing to remember when doing line work as well. On this side, I'll show you what happens when you don't use a inconsistent brush when doing line work, especially for skin. It makes the line work, I'm applying the same technique, but it just makes the line work look a lot thicker than it should be, especially with your brush setting. No matter how thin you make it, it's still going to be consistent all the way through. There's not going to be any pen pressure whatsoever, and your line work is going to look very distressed, and it doesn't look as good as you'd probably want it to. Another thing is when applying line weight, you want to add specific line weight to the part of the body that makes the most sense. So eyelashes, when you add eyelashes or the waterline or any part of the eye, you want to make sure that certain parts are thicker or the other parts are smaller, such as the part of your top lashes. Often I see eyes will seem one-dimensional when people do eyes, they'll often just have that, and their eyelashes are going in the same direction. They're not curving, and they're just straight. What I tend to find very aesthetically pleasing is to add these little bits of curves depending on the length of your eyelashes. It just adds a lot more visual character, and adding a thicker line to the top of your lid can also affect how it looks, and I find this to be a very important key when doing a lot of line work. Some things you might want to keep in mind when doing line work is actually what you can do with the finished part of your line work. What I used to often do was use colored line work, depending on the portrait I was doing. If it was like a spring themed or a summer themed line work, I'd use very bright and pastel colors such as orange or light yellow or a nice gold, or like a springtime blue color or a mist color. And adding these colored effects to your line work can make the colored portion of your art also pop, depending on your line work. The line work actually can make your whole piece pop depending on the quality and depending on the attributes you add to your line work to make it even better. Another thing to remember is to try using borders when coloring around a piece of line work. I'll show you with a piece right here. Right here, this is my channel art banner, and what I did was I usually do like this white border around my artwork because I just find it more pleasing to look at, and it adds some depth, and it doesn't make the picture look so flat as to where there's no border and it looks rather flat, you know. And a lot of the times I'll see just really messy line art, but the coloring is actually really good, and I thought that the people have a lot of potential when doing this. And now keep in mind that I am not professional in any way whatsoever. I just find that when I use these tips, it makes artwork look a little bit more attractive to look at. And another thing, I wouldn't recommend using a base, a pre-made base, as a way to practice for line art, especially because it's a pre-made base. It's not a good way to practice with something that's already been made for you. It makes it just as easy to do as coloring clip art, you know, as taking clip art, and you're basically coloring over clip art, as if you want to put it that way. And a lot of the times that it holds you back from practicing what you could actually be learning when actually working to get what you want to achieve in your art. And a lot of people forget that it takes a lot of trial and error to find what you like most. And if you use what other people's art that's been pre-made, or if you use bases or any kind of black coloring pages, it really prevents you from practicing your line work. So a lot of questions I get is how to create line work that that stands out more than your background. And what I usually tell people is that depending on your background, whether it's bright or if it's pastel color, you have to make the line work the opposite of what you want. But you don't want to make it stand out so much that it distracts from any other part of your artwork. The line work is an important key element to making your art pop, but it's not the main part of your artwork. Unless you're doing black and white portraits, then inking is extremely important. A lot of times what I see is also when people color in with a faulty tool setting, they often forget that there's white spaces when you don't when you use the fill bucket tool. Let me see if I can attempt to use the bucket tool without it filling the whole page. But if I just get rid of the sketch real quick. Yeah, there's some white spaces in there, as you can tell, but overall it's not that bad. You can easily hide it, but a lot of the time people forget to, and it just makes your artwork look really amateur. But that's okay if you're a beginner and you're starting out, because you learn from these. With art, that's the greatest thing, is that you never stop learning with these kinds of things. And I find that using other people's advice and tips and actually using references from real people helps you to advance your work to its fullest potential. Another thing is when adding texture, you want to be careful not to overdo it, because it can take away from everything else that you've worked hard on in your artwork, such as the color. The color is really important when doing artwork, and putting really heavy line work can affect the way the whole piece will look to a person if you overdo it. Adding a lot of texture. I see a lot of people with overdone cross-hatching, where the whole shading. I don't know where I'm getting shadowing from, but the whole shading will just be cross-hatching all the way through, and it just looks like there's this huge burn mark on whatever they've drawn the cross-hatching on, and it makes the artwork look really it makes it very messy, and it takes away from all of the originality of your line work. And a lot of the times I learned from one of the YouTubers that I saw. I hate to forget his name, but I'll put it in the description. He drew the Powerpuff Girls, and he said that squinting is often a very good idea to do with your artwork, to see where your line placement is and just to see what fits together in your artwork. And I actually thought that was really cool. I've been using it ever since I saw that. I swear, I hate forgetting people's names like that, but I'll definitely put it in the description down below. And I recommend you watch his channel. There's actually a lot of good people. The art community has grown since I've seen on YouTube. People like Drawing with Jazza or Bailey J or Mark Creeley or Sakuams. All of those people have kind of built this little community with has expanded the art community and created something that everyone can enjoy. And I actually I subscribe to like everyone that I can find that really gives me good advice when doing this stuff. Like Drawing with Jazza, I use a lot of his character design techniques, and it really helps me to practice what I want to achieve, because what I'm really bad at is actually backgrounds and nature settings. I am really bad at those kinds of parts of the artwork, because I just don't look at nature quite as often as I probably should. I am a lot busy with other things that probably shouldn't be of my concern, but looking at life and looking at real people and looking at nature and everything around you is a very important part of improving in your art style. Even if it's cartoony, you have to know the basic anatomy and the basic attributes of certain things, such as people. You have to know where the ears go, you have to know where the eyes go, and even if your character doesn't have a nose, you have to know the placement of each and everything. And by looking at certain things, like going outside and just sitting in the grass. You can easily learn a lot of things. I don't know how entertaining that would be, but you learn quite a lot just by sitting and looking. So right now what I'm doing is I'm adding the final touches to the do side, and then I'll add the final touches to the don't side when I'm finished adding the texture. And what people are afraid to do is adding pitch black in certain areas, which I understand since black is such a strong color when doing digital art. I find it actually can bring your art to life when doing line work, such as coloring in specific areas completely black, such as under the neck and under the chin portion of your people, the art with people in it, because that is part of the darkest area when doing shading. I got it right this time. And a lot of the time people tend to miss adding black can actually make your artwork look a lot better. It just depends on how you use it and the proper way to use it. So as you can see, we're almost done with this side of the face. I'm just gonna add the texture like I had mentioned before. And it's really important that you make your line art just come to life, because it's the compatible part of your artwork when doing coloring. It helps bring your art and stand out. It makes it pop from the page. You want to have people like your artwork, of course, but you also want it for you to like it yourself. And by practicing to do it the right way, you can create something that is ultimately very creative and original, and can be very pleasing to other people, and you can start your own little outlook on the art community. So the do side's pretty much done. Right here I'm going to do the don't side. I'll just flip my page and I'll finish what a lot of people tend to do. So the inconsistent line brush is just the one, or the consistent line brush is just the one thing that a lot of people forget that is really hard to use when doing line work. It's extremely hard to get good lines from a consistent brush. And especially if that brush is really big, like I have the setting on. Ooh, it just looks very choppy and messy. Certain things you can make and pull off with this, but a lot of the times it just does not help. And it makes your art look very just oh, I should add that one area that I really like. And brush size is very important as well. When doing things such as line work, you need to remember, like I've said before, texture is very important. It helps keep your line work have visual characteristics. It keeps visual character. I didn't intentionally make this look like that. It's just extremely hard for me to use this consistent brush. It looks quite, as you can see, it's quite different from the other one that we did. And a lot of people forget that the settings for your fill bucket tool can affect how you color it in. Like, I didn't take off the sketch layer and I put it on the canvas mode because I don't like using the layer mode because it colors the whole entire piece. So this is pretty much all I can give you on advice, really, but as you can tell, there's a really significant difference in the line work, and depending on your art style, this can have a huge effect on your art. So I hope you guys enjoyed this. I really had a lot of fun making it. If you have any other suggestions for any videos I should make in the future, please comment down below and let me know. I'm looking forward to seeing some of your work. You can follow me on Instagram and follow me on DeviantArt. You can watch me on DeviantArt. I do a lot of uploading on Instagram though. I would love to see your guys' work, and if you guys would show me that, I'd really appreciate it. I'll showcase some artwork based on my tutorials at the end of each week. I'll have tutorials on Tuesdays and speed art on Fridays. Anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed. Please like, share, and subscribe. If you have any other suggestions, again, comment down below and let me know. My name's DigiDraws, and I'll see you guys later. Stay crafty!